the non-proliferation regime and on its military engagements. The DPRK has been actively working towards acquiring new military capabilities in line with the 5-year military development plan it unveiled in January 2021. In 2024, the DPRK launched 1 intercontinental ballistic missile, 4 intermediate-range ballistic missiles, and multiple short-range ballistic missiles. It also attempted to launch a military reconnaissance satellite. The IRBM launches were associated with the testing of what the DPRK notes to be, and I quote, hypersonic maneuverable controlled warheads, end quote, and multiple warhead missiles. Also, there are indications that the DPRK continues to actively pursue its nuclear program. In September, DPRK state media reported on an inspection of a uranium enrichment base by the DPRK leader. This appears to corroborate earlier reports about the existence of a second, yet-to-be-declared uranium enrichment plant in Yangson, in addition to the uranium enrichment plant in Yongbyon. Further, on 20 November, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency reported that the agency observed that the 5-megawatt reactor to Yongbyon was not operating between mid-August and mid-October. According to IAEA experts, that gap would have provided sufficient time to refuel the reactor and start its 7th operational cycle. Also, in November this year, the DPRK openly displayed its weapon delivery systems during an exhibition in Pyongyang. The authorities showcased the latest solid-fuel Hwasong-19 ICBM, which the DPRK launched for the first time on 31 October. The missile set new records for the longest flight length and altitude reached by any DPRK ICBM launch. The Hwasong-19 and other weapon systems in the exhibition are produced in violation of relevant Security Council resolutions. Their open display demonstrates that the DPRK is far from slowing down its ballistic missile program. The DPRK's pursuit of its nuclear and ballistic missile programs undermines the global nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation regime. As we approach 2025, the final year of the DPRK's current 5-year military plan, we reiterate our calls on the DPRK to fully comply with its international obligations. Madam President, international attention has also recently focused on the reported increase in military cooperation between the DPRK and the Russian Federation. According to media reports, since 2023, the DPRK has transferred to the Russian Federation more than 13,000 containers of ammunition, missiles, and artillery. The latter include 170 millimeter self-propelled guns and 240 millimeter multiple rocket systems. Russian forces have also reportedly used SRBMs from the DPRK to strike Ukraine. Further, and again based on media reports, more than 10,000 DPRK troops have been sent to the Russian Federation since October, where they have received training and equipment. According to U.S. and Ukrainian officials, they are now deployed in Russia's Kursk region, fighting alongside Russian forces. While the United Nations is not in a position to verify these claims, they are a cause for concern, as noted by the Secretary General in a 3 November statement. On 18 November, in remarks I delivered on his behalf in the Council, the Secretary General stressed that the reported deployment of thousands of troops from the DPRK to the conflict zone and their involvement in the fighting adds fuel to the fire, further escalating and internationalizing this explosive conflict. We reiterate our call on all relevant actors to refrain from any steps that may lead to spillover and intensification of the war in Ukraine. Madam President, while the Security Council did not renew the mandate of the panel of experts that supported the committee established pursuant to Security Council Resolution 1718, the DPRK sanctions regime and the committee remain in place. I'd like to reiterate that international engagement with the DPRK is guided by Security Council resolutions 1718, 1874, 2087, 2094, 2270, 2321, as well as resolutions 2356, 2371, 2375, and 2397. In line with these resolutions, the DPRK shall cease the export of all arms and related materiel, and all member states shall prohibit the procurement of such arms and related materiel from the DPRK by their nationals. I recall that relevant Security Council resolutions are legally binding for all UN member states. As the Secretary General has stated, any relationship that a country has with the DPRK must entirely abide by the relevant Security Council sanctions. We remain deeply concerned about growing tensions on the Korean Peninsula, which have increasingly global ramifications. It is imperative that this Council act decisively to uphold the non-proliferation regime and international norms. The situation on the Korean Peninsula, a key peace and security issue, must be an area for cooperation. The Secretary General has consistently called for de-escalation and the urgent resumption of talks. Diplomatic engagement remains the only pathway to sustainable peace and complete and verifiable denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. In this respect, we welcome the willingness and offers to engage in dialogue with the DPRK without preconditions. We also recall the Security Council's commitment expressed in Resolution 2397 to a peaceful diplomatic and political solution to the situation on the Korean Peninsula. The Council must also remain attentive to the humanitarian situation in the DPRK. We reiterate the call on the DPRK to expedite the return of the UN country team and the international community to strengthen support for its people and advance the 2030 agenda. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank Ms. DiCarlo for her briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Jonah Leff.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to begin by thanking the Permanent Mission of the United States for giving me the opportunity to brief the Security Council of the United Nations today, and I congratulate the United States for its accomplishments during its presidency. My organization, Conflict Armament Research, documents and traces weapons and their components used in conflicts around the world with an aim to assisting states in countering diversion and proliferation. Madam President, the last time I briefed the Council, in June of this year, I presented findings that my organization had generated in January and February after examining the remnants of a missile recovered in Ukraine. In January 2024, a car field investigation team physically documented the remains of a ballistic missile that struck Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, on 2 January 2024. CAR documented the missile's rocket motor, its tail section, and almost 300 internal components manufactured by 26 companies from 8 countries and territories. Based on several unique features observed during the documentation, we determined that this missile was of the Hwasong-11 family manufactured in the DPRK in 2023. In the days following this initial documentation, our teams inspected 3 further identical DPRK missiles that struck Kyiv and Zaporizhzhia. Security Council resolutions on DPRK prohibit UN member states from procuring arms or related material from the DPRK and prohibit the DPRK from exporting this material. Our reporting on the matter was the first public analysis of such weapons launched outside the DPRK and in the war in Ukraine. CAR has reached the conclusion that the missiles were manufactured in the DPRK based on the missile's unique characteristics. The evidence that my organization observed and thoroughly documented firsthand irrefutably establishes that the missile fired on Ukraine were indeed of DPRK origin. The United Nations panels of experts on the DPRK, whose mandate has since not been renewed by the Security Council, subsequently confirmed CAR's findings. 2 months after my briefing to the Council in June, our team in Ukraine documented additional remnants of 4 missiles that we also attribute to the DPRK. These were recovered in July and August. On one of these missiles, CAR documented marks indicating missile production in 2024. This is the first public evidence of missiles having been produced in North Korea and then used in Ukraine within a matter of months, not years. CAR's latest field documentation and analysis highlight 3 key observations. First, it confirms the continued use of freshly manufactured North Korean ballistic missiles in Ukraine. Second, the discovery of a 2024 production mark on one of the missiles reveals a very short period between the production of these ballistic missiles, their transfer, and eventual use in Ukraine. Third, the presence of recently produced non-domestic components, some bearing 2023 production marks, among missile remnants illustrates North Korea's robust acquisition network for its ballistic missile program, despite UN sanctions prohibiting the transfer of this material for military purpose. On this last point, none of these components were manufactured in the DPRK. This highlights the DPRK's reliance on foreign manufactured components to sustain its domestic missile program. While formal tracing with industry is ongoing, in one case, CAR has identified a company incorporated in an East Asian country as the last known custodian of microprocessors documented by CAR in 3 separate DPRK missiles this year. Madam President, CAR has also documented 200 non-DPRK drones and missiles that have been used against Ukraine, consisting of thousands of components. Of these components, again, the vast majority bear the brands of companies based in Europe, Japan, or the United States. Through CAR's collaborative approach with industry, we have ascertained that these components found in remnants of weapon systems used against Ukraine derive from supplies by third-party distributors, mostly based in East Asia. Although the semiconductor industry is complex and layered in nature, CAR's boots-on-the-ground approach, characterized by field documentation, collaborative tracing with industry, triangulation, and targeted trade mapping, allows for the effective identification of entities of concern, including repeat cases of acquisition. This information is crucial to member states and industry. The proliferation and use of DPRK missiles leads to further erosion of global non-proliferation regimes. Specifically, any exports of ballistic missiles from the DPRK carried out following the introduction of UN embargoes on the country in 2006 represent violations of the sanctions regime. Security Council resolutions also forbid the DPRK from developing its ballistic missile program, meaning that individuals and entities involved in the facilitation and transfer of key components and materials may also have committed sanctions violations. Despite nearly 2 decades of sanctions on the DPRK, it has demonstrated this year its ability to produce and supply ballistic missiles for use against Ukraine within just a matter of months. CAR's global field investigation teams will continue to document weapon systems used in the conflict in Ukraine and will endeavor to highlight any developments as they occur, including the continued use of weapons manufactured by the DPRK. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your time.
I thank Mr. Leff for his statement. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I will give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Je voudrais tout d'abord remercier la secrétaire générale adjointe, Madame Di Carlo, pour sa présentation au Conseil, ainsi que Monsieur Leff pour son exposé. Madame la Présidente, Depuis de longs mois, il est clair que la Corée du Nord se rend complice de la guerre d'agression menée par la Russie contre l'Ukraine, en apportant un soutien militaire massif à l'effort de guerre russe. En plus de la fourniture en très grande quantité de munitions et de systèmes d'artillerie, il a été démontré que des missiles balistiques nord-coréens sont utilisés pour frapper l'Ukraine, comme à Kharkiv en janvier dernier, ou encore en juillet et en août. La France condamne le transfert et l'emploi de ces armes, qui représentent de graves violations des résolutions adoptées par le Conseil de sécurité, avec le soutien de la Russie elle-même. Il s'agit d'une menace directe pour la sécurité des Européens et la sécurité internationale. Le soutien nord-coréen à l'agression russe a franchi une nouvelle étape, avec le déploiement de soldats nord-coréens en Russie et leur engagement aux côtés des forces armées russes. La France condamne avec la plus grande fermeté l'engagement direct de ces troupes, qui représente une escalade inacceptable et une extension dangereuse du conflit. Il est clair que l'accroissement du soutien militaire nord-coréen traduit les difficultés rencontrées par la Russie, qui cherche par tous les moyens à poursuivre sa guerre d'agression, avec les conséquences délétères que nous connaissons pour l'ensemble de la communauté internationale. Madame la Présidente, l'accroissement de la coopération militaire illicite entre la Russie et la Corée du Nord constitue aussi un défi grave au régime international de non-prolifération, l'un des piliers fondamentaux de notre sécurité collective. En contrepartie du soutien militaire qu'elle reçoit, la Russie est devenue pourvoyeuse d'impunité et d'assistance aux programmes illégaux d'armes de destruction massive de la Corée du Nord. En mars dernier, la Russie a mis, seule, son veto à la reconduction du groupe d'experts du comité 17-18. Elle a ainsi privé tous les États membres d'une source d'information essentielle sur la mise en œuvre des résolutions de ce Conseil. En septembre dernier, le ministre russe des Affaires étrangères franchissait un nouveau pas en qualifiant la dénucléarisation de la Corée du Nord de question close. Ces propos constituent une remise en cause inacceptable de l'objectif établi par les résolutions du Conseil d'un abandon complet, vérifiable et irréversible des programmes d'armes nucléaires de la Corée du Nord. Lorsque ces missiles sont utilisés pour frapper les populations et les infrastructures civiles de l'Ukraine, la Corée du Nord recueille des informations sur leurs performances qu'elle peut utiliser pour développer son programme balistique. Ces missiles pourraient être employés dans l'avenir sur d'autres théâtres et servir de vecteurs à des armes nucléaires. Nous ne pouvons que nous inquiéter des autres contreparties que Pyongyang pourrait demander en matière d'assistance militaire et technologique à ces programmes d'armes de destruction massive pour sa complicité dans cette guerre d'agression. Madame la Présidente, il est de la responsabilité de la Russie de respecter les obligations qui sont les siennes en tant que membre permanent du Conseil de sécurité. Nous appelons donc, encore une fois, la Russie à mettre un terme à sa guerre d'agression. Nous exhortons la Russie et la Corée du Nord à se conformer à leurs obligations internationales, notamment aux résolutions de ce Conseil. Nous enjoignons la Corée du Nord à renouer avec le dialogue en vue d'une dénucléarisation complète, irréversible et vérifiable. Nous réaffirmons enfin notre détermination à soutenir l'Ukraine qui défend son indépendance, sa souveraineté et son intégrité territoriale. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank you for convening this critical meeting requested by 7 Council members, including Japan. I also thank USG DiCarlo and Mr. Jonas Lev, Executive Director of Conflict Armament Research, for their informative briefings. As we just heard from the briefers, there is enough evidence for the existence and expansion of military cooperation between Russia and DPRK. Their unlawful military cooperation, including direct support by North Korea for Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, marks a dangerous expansion of the conflict with serious consequences for European and Indo-Pacific security. Russia is continuously attacking Ukraine using weapons supplied by DPRK, violating the relevant Security Council resolutions. The deployment of North Korean troops to Russia and their engagement in combat against Ukraine constitutes a clear violation of international law, including the UN Charter. We, as a responsible Security Council member, cannot just sit still and watch this situation, as the relevance of the Security Council, which has been cultivated over 8 decades, is undermined. The members of the Security Council are the ones, above all, who should lead in adhering to the Council's resolutions, but Russia acts to the contrary. No excuse can justify this fact. The panel of experts established in 2009 was regrettably forced to terminate due to the veto by Russia in April this year. It had been a treasure trove of information over the past 15 years. No reasonable person would doubt that it was Russia's clear intention to veil its unlawful military cooperation with North Korea. Madam President, we now stand at the crossroads whether we take actions and raise our voices to maintain international order based on the rule of law, guided by the UN Charter, or we remain silent in the face of this unprecedented threat to the values and the order of the UN system and the relevance of this Council. Japan, particularly as an elected member of the Security Council over the past 2 years, has been taking actions to defend the value of the UN and will continue to do so for all time to come. The Security Council, consisting of only 15 member states, is responsible for addressing challenges to global peace and security on behalf of all 193 UN member states, and this role should never be cast aside in the name of a single country's national interest. Madam President, the threat of North Korean military activities goes beyond the region and now extends around the entire world. The North Korea constitutes to conduct provocations, including an ICBM-class missile launch at the end of October, which has the highest and longest length trajectory of any missile that North Korea has launched to date, with an estimated range capability of 15,000 kilometers, covering 3/4 of the globe. Not to mention that recent nuclear developments, including the release of images of a uranium enrichment facility for the first time in September, are also of grave concern. These reckless nuclear and ballistic missile developments by DPRK jeopardize the global non-proliferation regimes. In this connection, there is a big question about what North Korea has gained or will gain in return for its military support for Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Any support or benefit to North Korea related to its nuclear and ballistic missile development is a menace to the global non-proliferation regime. Madam President, I would like to conclude my remarks by recalling that the advancement of DPRK's nuclear and missile activities is an imminent threat to the entire globe, and call on all UN member states to uphold the non-proliferation regime, the very foundation of peace and security of the international community. Today's agenda, non-proliferation/DPRK, clearly describes the reason why we are here to discuss at this critical moment. Japan is committed to addressing this global challenge, not just as a member of the Security Council, but also as a responsible adherent to the United Nations anchored by the UN Charter. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Japan for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, President. And I also thank USG De Carlo and Mr. Leff for their comprehensive yet worrying briefings. We joined the call for this meeting because we are deeply concerned about DPRK's growing military cooperation with the Russian Federation, including in support of its aggression against Ukraine. As we have stated multiple times, the transfer of arms as well as ammunition and related materials to and from the DPRK is a flagrant violation of multiple Security Council resolutions, as well as the 1718 sanctions regime. Over the past 2 years, the DPRK has continued to advance its unlawful WMDs program, including through a record number of ballistic missile launches. Throughout this period, the DPRK has enjoyed external support for its ever-evolving architecture of sanctions evasion, and this Council has not been able to speak with one voice to condemn it. Multiple reports show that the DPRK transferred ballistic missiles and ammunition to the Russian Federation in support of its war in Ukraine. We strongly condemn such actions. These actions are blatant violation of the sanctions regime, gravely undermine the UN Charter, and contribute to furthering the suffering of the Ukrainian people. We also reiterate our disappointment for the termination of the 1718 panel of experts. The panel's reports represented a crucial source of information on the sanctions implementation. Its absence greatly facilitates violations, with the results we are witnessing today. Equally concerning is that the regime continues to prioritize its unlawful WMDs program and its military engagements over the needs of its people. Despite an estimated over 40% of the population in need of direct assistance, the regime continues to deny access to the UN and international humanitarian actors. President, the threat posed by the DPRK is no longer a regional one. Its advanced missile capabilities, as well as its active involvement in and support for Russia's aggression of Ukraine, have detrimental consequences for European security as well. This is unacceptable, and the Council should send a clear and unified message to the DPRK. Sanctions remain in place, and it is imperative that all Member States fully implement them. In this connection, we encourage the 1718 Committee to continue to actively engage with the wider membership, as well as with relevant international organizations, to ensure a constant flow of information. Years of Council's inaction and external support have emboldened the DPRK. We deeply regret that during Malta's tenure on the Council, this threat to international peace and security has continued to grow rather than being addressed, as the mandate of this body would dictate. While we prepare to leave the Council, we will continue to engage on this file towards the ultimate goal of lasting peace and denuclearization in the Korean Peninsula. To this end, we urge all members to set aside their differences and collectively address this situation. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President, for convening this important meeting. I also extend my gratitude to USGT Carlo and Mr. Jonah Leff, Executive Director of Conflict Armament Research, for their briefings. Madam President, as the year comes to an end, let me take this opportunity to recap the significant developments we witnessed on North Korea's unlawful WMD program in 2024 and how it kept threatening international peace and security. First, North Korea's redefinition of inter-Korean relations announced early this year marks the culmination of North Korea's nuclear policy. For a couple of years leading up to 2024, North Korea had taken unprecedented steps to develop tactical nuclear weapons, diversify delivery vehicles, and lower the nuclear threshold. Besides launching ICBMs such as Hwasong-19 late last October, Pyongyang test-fired various types of short-range ballistic and cruise missiles capable of carrying tactical nuclear warheads. North Korea also adopted a nuclear policy law that significantly lowered the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons in 2022 and incorporated that policy into its constitution in 2023. And then came the final piece of the puzzle when Kim Jong-un announced at the beginning of this year a policy shift on inter-Korean relations. By scrapping the 7-decade-long policy of unification and redefining the Republic of Korea as a foreign hostile state, the North Korean leader eliminated the final psychological hurdle in order to justify a preemptive nuclear strike on the ROK. As a follow-up, North Korea took the substantial military step of completely cutting off road and rail links to the south in October. Second, this year saw a marked and qualitative shift in the state of military cooperation between North Korea and Russia. Besides providing a huge amount of ammunition, ballistic missiles, and artillery to Russia in violation of relevant Security Council resolutions, North Korea dispatched more than 11,000 troops, thus joining as a belligerent party in Russia's illegal war against Ukraine. North Korean soldiers are already engaged in combat operations, with some being reportedly killed in action on the battlefield. This illegal military cooperation goes far beyond anything we could have imagined. When the war first broke out, we never expected that North Korean troops would be fighting on the European battlefield and that Russia would rely on North Korea's military to such an extent. What is all the more worrisome is that no one knows how far this military cooperation will go and where it might end. They may move the goalposts as they see fit as the situation unfolds. With the recently ratified Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty, Russia and North Korea formalized this illicit military cooperation. In addition to gaining first-hand experience in modern warfare and economic benefits from Russia, Pyongyang may acquire advanced military technology, material, and equipment for its nuclear and missile program. We assess that Russia provides the air defense missile system to North Korea. Furthermore, Russia is accepting North Korean workers, which is one of the few revenue sources for cash-strapped Pyongyang. It is deeply troubling that Russian local authorities are openly speaking up about hiring North Korean workers to fill labor shortage, which would be a clear violation of multiple Security Council resolutions. The ROK assesses that 4,000 North Korean workers have been sent to Russia this year alone, and North Korea may use regular passenger rail service resumed earlier this week and other means to dispatch more workers to Russia. Meanwhile, the Russian Foreign Minister's description of North Korea's denuclearization as a closed issue would seriously undermine the global non-proliferation regime. If Russia abandons its long-held position of denuclearization of North Korea, it will erode the very foundation of the NPT regime. Such an outcome will not be in anyone's interest, in particular the nuclear weapon states, including China and eventually Russia. Madam President, this year is indeed an inflection point. Going forward, however, we must expect further uncertainties looming over the horizon. North Korea has a history of provocative actions during U.S. presidential transitions, designed to grab attention, raise the stakes, and set the stage for direct negotiations with the new U.S. administration. This pattern can recur within the upcoming months. This time, it could be another ICBM, or a military satellite launch, or even its 7th nuclear test. Dear colleagues, as members of the Security Council, we should stand united to address North Korea's unlawful WMD program and remain prepared to deal with any possible provocations by the DPRK. We bear a heavy responsibility on our shoulders for the maintenance of international peace and security, as well as upholding the global non-proliferation regime underpinned by the NPT. We must therefore ensure all relevant Security Council resolutions will be fully implemented by all UN member states. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank USG DiCarlo and Mr. Lev for their valuable contributions. Madam President, my country is deeply concerned with the expansion of military engagements of the DPRK, especially its military cooperation with Russia. This represents an escalation of Russia's illegal war on Ukraine. Firstly, evidence on arms transfers cropped up. Millions of artillery shells and numerous missiles were reportedly transferred to Russia for use in its war against Ukraine. Secondly, evidence emerged of DPRK troops' presence in Europe. And what is more, the latest reports indicate that they are now actively involved in this war. These developments represent blatant violations of UN Security Council resolutions and heavily imply that Russia is willing to undermine the Council and the UN to achieve short-term military advantages. At the same time, the North Korean leadership is immensely profiting from this rekindling of cooperation. With no considerations being given to international law, the Charter, or Security Council resolutions, there are indications that the DPRK is acquiring new armaments and military technology from Russia. In addition to this, comes a deeply troubling statement by Foreign Minister Lavrov, who publicly said that Russia viewed the notion of denuclearizing North Korea as a closed matter. Slovenia is deeply concerned that as a consequence of these developments, the DPRK leadership will be able to further sustain its illegal ballistic, nuclear, and other WMD programs to the detriment of its own civilian population. Madam President, the DPRK no longer represents only a regional challenge, but is destabilizing two parts of the world at the same time. It is high time for the DPRK to cease its provocative activities and return to dialogue and diplomacy. At the same time, Russia must discontinue its illegal support to DPRK. We need to employ all diplomatic means to bring the DPRK back to the negotiating table. There is no legitimate alternative to dialogue and diplomacy, and we will need a lot of both to comprehensively address the imperative of DPRK's denuclearization. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for their statement. I now give the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And thank you to USG DiCarlo and Mr. Leff for your briefing. Over the past year, we've seen the DPRK providing increasing support to Russia's illegal war against Ukraine through the supply of munitions, ballistic missiles, and now manpower, with the deployment of more than 10,000 DPRK troops to Russia. The Council should be deeply concerned that DPRK troops are now engaging in direct combat operations against Ukraine, involving themselves directly in the largest war in Europe in a generation. A war the General Assembly has repeatedly described as a violation of international law. While Russia's growing reliance on third country support comes as no surprise, given its weakened state and its desperate efforts to steal more Ukrainian territory, this is a grave error by DPRK. We call upon Pyongyang to withdraw its forces from the theatre of combat and encourage all countries with influence in Pyongyang to use it accordingly. It should by now be crystal clear to the DPRK, your support for Russia's illegal war in Europe is not in your interests. You must cease this support immediately and return to meaningful engagement with the international community. Colleagues, deepening military cooperation between Russia and the DPRK has significant implications for security and stability in Europe, the Korean Peninsula, and elsewhere. We should all be worried about a DPRK with improved military technology and enhanced capacity to export weapons. Recent reports that Russia intends to transfer MiG-29 and Su-27 fighter aircraft to DPRK further exposes Russia's willingness to raise tensions on the Korean Peninsula and undermine regional stability in the Indo-Pacific, all in service of its war against Ukraine. And Foreign Minister Lavrov's declaration that the notion of denuclearizing North Korea is a, quote, closed issue, unquote, is a reckless departure from the agreed principle of complete, verifiable, and irreversible disarmament, and undermines the Non-Proliferation Treaty. We call on Russia, an NPT depository state, to align their words and actions with their stated commitment to global nuclear non-proliferation principles. We will continue to impose costs on Russia and DPRK for this dangerous expansion of the war. If Putin was truly interested in peace, he could end this war today by ceasing his deployment of DPRK troops on the front line and ending his country's aggression against Ukraine. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Guyana.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank Undersecretary General DiCarlo and Mr. Leff for their briefings. I also acknowledge the presence of the representatives of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Ukraine, and the European Union in this meeting. Madam President, Guyana reiterates its condemnation of all ballistic missile launches in 2024 by the DPRK in violation of relevant Security Council resolutions. We urge the DPRK to adhere scrupulously to its obligations under these resolutions, to abandon its nuclear weapons program as well as its ballistic missile program, and to destroy all other existing weapons of mass destruction. We also encourage all member states to comply with and implement the relevant Council resolutions related to the DPRK. In this regard, we stress that any military engagements with the DPRK should fully align with international law and with these resolutions. Madam President, the Security Council, through the 1718 Committee, maintains its mandate of overseeing the implementation of the measures outlined in Council resolutions related to the DPRK, despite the expiration of the mandate of the Committee's panel of experts. We recall that the fulfillment of the objectives of the Security Council resolutions is critical to reducing tensions on the Korean Peninsula through a peaceful and comprehensive solution. To this end, we will continue to support alternative options within the Council that seek to address the gaps in reporting and monitoring the sanctions related to the DPRK. We stress that a continuous flow of information on the implementation of the DPRK sanctions regime remains critical to the work of the committee in the execution of its mandate. Additionally, Guyana believes that dialogue and diplomacy remain critical to resolving the tensions on the peninsula. In this regard, we again urge resumption of dialogue among all concerned parties so that progress can be achieved in de-escalating the tensions. Madam President, in conclusion, Guyana reaffirms its commitment to the Council's efforts to bring about full compliance with its resolutions related to the DPRK, including through the 1718 Sanctions Committee. We also reaffirm our commitment to the advancement of the global non-proliferation and disarmament agenda and call on states that have not yet done so to ratify the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We further reiterate our support for the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, which we believe is one of the key aspirations to achieving a world free of nuclear weapons and ensuring international peace and security. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of China.
主席，当前全球安全形势持续恶化，地缘政治空前紧张，朝鲜半岛局势更趋敏感复杂，未来走向充满不稳定和不确定性。在此背景下，国际社会应当共同努力，推动半岛问题的政治解决进程。一是要重视维稳防乱，维护半岛和平稳定，防止半岛生战生乱，符合各方共同利益，顺应国际社会共同期待，是当前各方立场主张的最大公约数。当前形势下，各方都应保持冷静克制，避免采取任何可能激化矛盾、加剧紧张的言行，防止局势进一步恶化，甚至发生不测事态。二是要营造对话氛围。历史和实践反复证明，只要各方愿意开展对话，彼此相向而行，半岛局势就能出现缓和，半岛问题的政治解决就能取得进展。有关各方应采取理性务实态度，尽快恢复接触，建立互信，重启对话，共同努力打破当前僵局。个别国家应走出制裁施压的迷思， 采取切实举措，真正释放善意，展现对话诚意。三是要寻求治本之策。半岛问题作为冷战残余，根源在于长期未能实现停核机制转换，各方尤其是美朝之间的信任赤字严重。要从根本上解决半岛问题，实现地区的持久和平稳定，必须标本兼治，综合施策，必须秉持共同安全理念，重视地区国家的合理安全关切，推动实现从停战机制到和平机制的转变。中方为此提出的双轨并进思路和分阶段同步走原则，是推动政治解决进程、实现半岛长治久安的有效出路。四是要摒弃冷战思维。朝鲜战争已经结束70多年，但半岛上空的冷战阴云始终未曾消散，甚至在不断加剧。个别国家执迷于冷战思维和零和博弈，不断操弄半岛局势，借机加速推进印太战略，强化地区军事同盟，特别是在半岛及周边地区加大军事力量投放和战略资产部署，严重损害包括中国在内的地区国家的安全利益。有关国家应停止借半岛问题推进地缘战略、挑动阵营对抗的错误做法，否则半岛问题的政治解决就难以顺利推进。主席，中方注意到，刚才一些成员在发言中谈到当前欧洲安全与朝鲜半岛局势的关系。需要强调的是，乌克兰问题同朝鲜半岛问题的经纬、性质完全不同，将两者挂钩只会使两个问题都更加复杂难解。而以担忧欧洲安全和亚太安全相互交织、出现共振为借口，推动北约越界扩权，染指亚太，只会进一步激化地区矛盾，加剧各方对立，中方坚决反对。最后，我愿指出，安理会处理半岛问题的出发点和落脚点，应是推动半岛问题的政治解决进程，而不是单方面施压，更不是政治作秀。安理会通过的各项涉朝决议都应该得到完整、准确、平衡的执行。中国作为安理会常任理事国，一直认真执行各项涉朝决议，履行应尽的国际义务。同时，中国作为半岛近邻和负责任的大国，也一直在以自己的方式为推动早日重启对话、维护半岛和平稳定、实现东北亚地区的长治久安发挥建设性作用。我们呼吁有关各方同中方一道，继续为此做出努力。谢谢。
I thank the representative of China for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. أشكر وكيلة الأمين العام السيدة دي كارلو على إحاطتها. استمعنا بعناية إلى ممثل المجتمع المدني. بداية تؤكد الجزائر من جديد التزامها بمبادئ نزع السلاح النووي وعدم الانتشار وبتنفيذ قرارات مجلس الأمن. ونعتقد أن لجنة القرار 1718 لا تزال المحفل الأكثر ملائمة وصلة لمناقشة المسائل المتعلقة بتنفيذ نظام الجزاءات المفروض على جمهورية كوريا الشعبية الديمقراطية. إن ولاية اللجنة وخبرتها التقنية تجعلها أكثر ملائمة للتعامل مع هذه القضايا بطريقة متوازنة وموضوعية. نؤكد على أهمية الحفاظ على قدرة اللجنة على أداء وظائفها التقنية بفعالية وفي هذا السياق نقدر جهود اللجنة المستمرة في معالجة الاستثناءات الإنسانية وتيسير تقديم المساعدة الأساسية للسكان المدنيين. وفيما يتعلق بمختلف الشواغل المعبر عنها، ترى الجزائر أنه ينبغي معالجة هذه المسائل من خلال القنوات التقنية القائمة في إطار لجنة القرار 17-18، حيث يضمن هذا النهج التقييم السليم للمعلومات مع تجنب أي تسييس غير مبرر. وإذ تواصل الجزائر الدعوة إلى نهج دبلوماسي أكثر شمولا يعالج الأسباب الكامنة وراء التوترات في شبه الجزيرة الكورية، فإنها ترى أن الجزاءات وإن كانت جزءا من أدوات المجلس ينبغي تنفيذها جنبا إلى جنب مع مبادرات دبلوماسية هادفة تهدف إلى بناء الثقة وتعزيز الحوار. وفي هذا الصدد نؤيد وضع خارطة طريق تدريجية يمكن أن تشمل تدابير متبادلة لتشجيع خطوات ملموسة نحو نزع السلاح النووي، فقد أظهرت التجارب أنه من غير المرجح أن يؤدي نهج الكل أو لا شيء إلى نتائج مستدامة. من جهة أخرى، لا نزال نشعر بقلق إزاء تأثير الجزاءات على السكان المدنيين، وندعو إلى مواصلة الاهتمام بالاعتبارات الإنسانية، ونشجع على تنفيذ فعال لآلية الاستثناءات التابعة للجنة والتي لها دور حيوي في هذا الصدد. وتطلعا إلى المستقبل ومن أجل تحقيق سلام مستدام في شبه الجزيرة الكورية، تدعو الجزائر جميع الأطراف إلى المشاركة البناءة في إطار قرارات مجلس الأمن ذات الصلة، ونود التأكيد على أهمية التدابير التالية: الالتزام بالتقييم التقني لتنفيذ الجزاءات، تعزيز الدعم الإنساني للسكان المدنيين، تدابير تدريجية لبناء الثقة، والمشاركة الدبلوماسية المستدامة التي تعالج الشواغل الأمنية لجميع الأطراف. ختاما، وإذ نشجع جميع أصحاب المصلحة على العمل من أجل خفض التوترات وتهيئة الظروف المواتية لإجراء حوار مجد، يظل هدفنا المشترك إقامة سلام واستقرار دائمين في شبه الجزيرة الكورية بالوسائل الدبلوماسية. شكرا السيد الرئيس.
I thank the representative of Algeria for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Madam President. We thank USG Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo for her important briefing. We take note of the contribution of Mr. Jonah Leff. At the outset, Sierra Leone reaffirms its unwilling and international peace and security, and calls for concerted and concrete efforts to combat proliferation efforts worldwide. We reiterate the provision of the Charter of the United Nations that states that all members shall settle their disputes by peaceful means in such manner that international peace and security are not endangered. Madam President, the DPRK's advancement of its nuclear and ballistic missile program is a cause for concern and requires the highest level of attention. We reiterate a call for the DPRK to respect and fully comply with its obligations under the numerous Security Council resolutions that prohibits its continuous and alarming nuclear and ballistic weapons program. In this regard, it is crucial for the Security Council to strengthen and increase its efforts to address the growing concern of nuclear expansion in the DPRK, which further heightens tensions in the peninsula and undermines ongoing efforts for a sustainable and long-lasting solution to this very serious issue in the region. We also reiterate our call for the strong support and implementation by member states of the United Nations Security Council resolutions that outlines the sanction obligations to deter further escalation and advancement of the DPRK's nuclear weapons program. Such efforts will give credence to the Council's authority and to global non-proliferation action. Madam President, the DPRK's humanitarian crisis and economic constraint is highly complex and intricate. It is therefore important that due focus is extended to addressing the underlying humanitarian and human rights issues in the country. In this connection, we call for increased diplomatic efforts to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula and urge the DPRK to return to negotiations to end its nuclear programs in an unconditional and irreversible manner. Sierra Leone also calls on the DPRK to engage bilaterally and multilaterally to unequivocally commit to transparent, complete, verifiable, irreversible, and non-discriminatory nuclear disarmament. Additionally, we reiterate our call for the CTBT's entry into force, noting its valuable contribution to halting further modernization and increase in vertical and horizontal proliferation of nuclear weapons, thereby advancing the goal of nuclear disarmament. We conclude by echoing our previous call for the need for a holistic and comprehensive assessment of the nuclear program of the DPRK, drawing upon the global effort for non-proliferation to promote international peace and security. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Mi delegación agradece la exposición informativa de la Secretaria General Adjunta, Rosemary de Carlo. He escuchado con atención la presentación realizada por el representante de la sociedad civil. El Ecuador expresa su profunda preocupación ante las reiteradas acciones de la República Popular Democrática de Corea que violan de manera flagrante las resoluciones de este Consejo, socavando el régimen de no proliferación nuclear y exacerbando las tensiones regionales y globales. La constante realización de pruebas balísticas, así como el desarrollo de armamento nuclear, constituyen amenazas directas a la estabilidad internacional y a la arquitectura global de no proliferación. A esto se suman los recientes informes sobre el envío de armamento, municiones y la movilización de tropas norcoreanas hacia líneas del frente ruso en Ucrania, que son acciones alarmantes y peligrosas. Señora Presidenta, la falta de consistencia y ausencia de un mensaje unificado del Consejo de Seguridad ante el comportamiento desafiante de la República Popular Democrática de Corea afecta la credibilidad de este órgano. El silencio del Consejo envía una señal equivocada a Pyongyang. En el pasado, el Consejo de Seguridad fue capaz de enviar un mensaje unánime y claro frente a violaciones por parte de la RPDC, pero hoy lamento profundamente el estancamiento que caracterizan las deliberaciones de este Consejo. Mientras las diferencias continúan obstaculizando una respuesta colectiva efectiva, las amenazas a la paz y seguridad internacionales se multiplican. La amplia membresía de las Naciones Unidas exige a este Consejo un mensaje de respeto y cumplimiento al derecho internacional, la Carta de las Naciones Unidas y las resoluciones del Consejo de Seguridad. Debemos recordar que la Carta de las Naciones Unidas nos confiere la responsabilidad primordial de mantener la paz y seguridad internacionales. Este principio debe guiar nuestras decisiones por encima de cualquier otra consideración. Distinguidos colegas, las acciones unilaterales que priorizan el poder militar sobre el diálogo y la cooperación erosionan los pilares sobre los cuales se construyó esta organización. En este contexto, el Ecuador hace un llamado a la RPDC para que cese inmediatamente sus actividades provocadoras y se comprometa de manera plena con sus obligaciones internacionales asumidas bajo la Carta de las Naciones Unidas. Al ser esta la última vez que mi país tiene la oportunidad de tratar este tema luego de 2 años de membresía en este Consejo, exhortamos nuevamente a los miembros con mayor influencia con la RPDC a restaurar su compromiso hacia la búsqueda de soluciones dialogadas y evitar escaladas innecesarias que podrían tener consecuencias catastróficas. La diplomacia debe prevalecer. Muchas gracias.
I thank the representative of Ecuador for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Госпожа председатель, приветствуем участие в заседании постоянного представителя Корейской Народно-Демократической Республики. С удивлением выслушали госпожу Розмари Ди Карло. Это был весьма своеобразный брифинг высокопоставленного представителя ООН, основанный на сообщениях прессы, которые ООН не может подтвердить. Так что же вы тогда приводите эти данные с этой трибуны? Те, кто вас слушает, последнюю фразу не расслышат, а будут воспринимать сказанное вами, пересказ вами газетных инсинуаций за чистую монету и мнение ООН. Получается, вы участвуете в раскручивании фейкового политизированного нарратива в нарушении своих обязательств по статье 100 Устава ООН. О характере оценок господина Лефа я уже высказывался. Повторяться не буду. Как мы ранее говорили и о выводах ряда членов почившей в БОЗе группы экспертов, посетивших Киев, ни один из которых не был экспертом в области баллистики. За последние годы Совет провел немало заседаний по инициативе Соединенных Штатов по ситуации на Корейском полуострове под лицемерными предлогами. Они методично созывались всякий раз, когда КНДР принимала посильные меры по укреплению собственной национальной безопасности в ответ на военные провокации Вашингтона, Сеула и Токио. Главной задачей в таких заседаниях было 2. Возложить на Пхеньян всю полноту ответственности за деградацию ситуации на полуострове и изобразить себя в качестве главных региональных миротворцев. Однако это не просто так. Все как раз наоборот. Это совсем не так. Ситуация намеренно выворачивается наизнанку, как будто это не Соединенные Штаты и их союзники наращивают на всех скоростях свое военное присутствие в Азиатско-Тихоокеанском регионе, планомерно разрушающие там перспективы построения внеблоковой архитектуры коллективной безопасности. Как будто в последние месяцы не противниками Пхеньяна проводились масштабные военные учения под названиями Freedom Shield, Freedom Flag, Freedom Edge с совместным ядерным планированием. О какой свободе вообще идет речь? Эти провокационные акции сопровождаются скоплением у границ КНДР сотен единиц авиатехники, сухопутных сил, морской пехоты и спецназа. Стоит напомнить, что в рамках этих маневров последовательно отрабатываются сценарии гипотетического вооруженного конфликта с применением ядерного оружия и физического устранения северокорейского руководства. Указанная линия, как известно, производится в нарушении резолюций Совета Безопасности ООН по корейскому регулированию, предписывающих решать проблему полуострова исключительно мирными, дипломатическими и политическими средствами, а также путем диалога. Это записано именно в тех резолюциях, на которые вы постоянно ссылаетесь. В том, что касается сотрудничества России с Пхеньяном, то неоднократно озвучивали нашу позицию. КНДР – наш близкий сосед и партнер, с которым мы развиваем отношения во всех областях. Это наше суверенное право. Российское взаимодействие с КНДР и в военной, и в других сферах соответствует международному праву и не нарушает его. Оно не направлено против третьих стран и не представляет никакой угрозы для государств региона или международного сообщества. И не сомневайтесь, мы продолжим развивать это сотрудничество. 12 ноября был ратифицирован договор между Российской Федерацией и КНДР о всеобъемлющем стратегическом партнерстве. В документе заложены базовые принципы дальнейшего развития российско-корейских связей, нацеленных на углубление партнерства и стратегической кооперации по широкому спектру приоритетных для двух государств направлений, построение справедливой международной системы. Он носит неконфронтационный, оборонительный характер и нацелен на поддержание стабильности в регионе Северо-Восточной Азии. Вы же сами всегда говорили, что по вашим правилам НАТО – оборонительный союз. Почему же вы так нервничаете сейчас, если речь идет о совместной обороне? В ответ на тезисы представителя Республики Корея хотели бы отметить следующее. Прежде чем рассуждать о последствиях действий Пхеньяна, вам следовало бы сначала разобраться с тем, что происходит в вашей стране, и не только с внутриполитической точки зрения. По утечкам тех же СМИ в течение последних месяцев Сеул сознательно старался спровоцировать резкий всплеск напряженности на полуострове. В этих целях осуществлялась отправка в направлении КНДР беспилотников, чтобы вызвать ответную жесткую реакцию Пхеньяна. Имеется информация, что бывшим министром обороны Республики Корея планировалась акция по обстрелу мест запуска с территории севера воздушных шаров с мусором. Если это так, то голословные утверждения Сеула о якобы угрожающем характере взаимодействия России и КНДР выглядят несостоятельно и лицемерно. Госпожа председатель, до сегодняшнего дня алармистские созывы Совета Безопасности казались рутинной обработкой политического заказа, которая, по всей видимости, была призвана произвести впечатление на внутреннюю аудиторию. Из разряда продемонстрировать, что после спровоцированной вами же эскалации вы, дескать, следите за событиями и задействуете для этого Совет Безопасности. Характер и необычная лапидарность сегодняшних выступлений, запросивших нынешнее заседание, это только подтверждают. Как и идентичных излагаемых вами тезисов. Мы могли бы еще больше сократить время этой увлекательной встречи, если бы вы выделили кого-нибудь одного выступить от имени всех 7 запросивших это заседание стран. Это бы ничего не добавило и ничего не убавило из вашего нарратива. Однако выбор темы для сегодняшнего заседания пересекает все рамки приличия. Какое право имеет США и его союзники в регионе читать мораль о расширении вовлеченности КНДР в военную активность, тогда как именно Вашингтон последовательно занимается этим по всему миру с самыми разрушительными последствиями? Эти обвинения не только лицемерны. Это еще и попытка отвлечь внимание от патовой ситуации как внутри Украины, так и на линии боевого соприкосновения, а также оправдать участие в конфликте натовских военных специалистов. В рамках гибридной войны с целью нанесения России стратегического поражения, о чем франкосаксы и их союзники не стесняются заявлять открыто, они не только накачивают киевский режим различными видами вооружений, но и перебрасывают на Украину свои войска. В рядах ВСУ сражаются военнослужащие западных армий. Это факт. И это никакие не добровольцы, а офицеры, без которых было бы невозможно использовать не то что западное дальнобойное оружие, но и украинские средства дальнего поражения. Без их участия, без данных космической разведки, которой, как вы понимаете, у Киева быть не может, без специалистов по программированию полетных заданий, украинцы не смогли бы использовать ракетную технику. Именно при военной помощи Запада киевский режим смог реализовать Курскую авантюру в августе, не спровоцированно напав там на мирное, именно мирное население российских городов. ВСУ в упор расстреливали гражданских лиц, похищали их и препятствовали эвакуации. Мы подробно об этом рассказывали в ходе неформальной встречи по формуле Ария в октябре, в том числе демонстрировали показания очевидцев, которые подтверждали, что в этой безрассудной вылазке были самым активным образом задействованы иностранные военнослужащие. Но об этом всем западные делегации в этом зале предпочитают не говорить, отмахиваясь лицемерными фразами о праве Украины на самооборону и готовности оказывать поддержку Киеву, сколько потребуется. Сегодня была упомянута здесь международная группа мониторинга санкций в отношении КНДР. Механизм, который преподносится в качестве замены группе санкционных экспертов Комитета Совета Безопасности 17-18. Занимавшийся перепечаткой газетных материалов, как госпожа Ди Карло сегодня, и полностью дискредитировавший себя. Хотим подчеркнуть, что данный инструмент, созданный в обход Совета Безопасности, не имеет легитимного международного мандата. Его создание прямо противоречит Уставу ООН, как инициатива, подрывающая исключительные прерогативы Совета Безопасности в вопросах наблюдения за осуществлением своих санкционных мер. Поэтому любые продукты, выработанные в данном формате, не будут иметь никакой легитимности. И, в чем мы не сомневаемся, будут являться подтасовкой и дезинформацией. Коллеги, возвращаясь к ситуации на Корейском полуострове, хотели бы вновь констатировать, Совету Безопасности следует кардинально пересмотреть подходы, чтобы вывести ситуацию из опасного тупика, а не усугублять ее еще больше. Мы не раз говорили, с каких направлений можно было бы начать движение к нормализации. Но для этого в западных столицах должны коренным образом перенастроить свое мышление, которое живет в парадигме холодной войны. Чем раньше Вашингтон и его подельники откажутся мыслить в этом застарелом формате, тем скорее Совет будет способен благотворно повлиять на развитие ситуации в регионе. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Madame la Présidente, nous remercions la secrétaire générale adjointe Rosemary DiCarlo et M. Jonah Leff de Conflict Armament Research pour leurs exposés. Nous saluons la participation des représentants de l'Ukraine, de la République populaire démocratique de Corée et de l'Union européenne à nos délibérations. Les rapports qui viennent d'être faits sont profondément troublants et, si confirmés, les faits constitueraient non seulement des violations du droit international, mais représenterait un développement qui risque d'avoir de graves conséquences pour la sécurité européenne, asiatique et globale. Trois aspects nous semblent particulièrement importants. Premièrement, d'un point de vue légal, un déploiement de troupes des forces armées par la RPDC, si avère, s'ajouterait au nombre croissant de rapports fondés faisant état du transfert illégal d'armes à la Russie. Toute transaction d'armes avec le RPDC constitue une violation des sanctions de ce Conseil. Cela concerne la vente, l'achat, l'importation et l'exportation d'armes vers ou depuis la RPDC, l'emploi de missiles balistiques de type KN-23 et l'impact de leur utilisation sur la population civile ukrainienne soulèvent également des questions quant au respect du droit international humanitaire. Une coopération militaire telle que décrite serait également proscrite selon les résolutions 17-18, 18-64-14 et 22-70, alors que la résolution 23-97 prévoyait le rapatriement de tous les travailleurs étrangers de la RPTC. La présence de milliers de troupes est inconciliable avec la lettre et encore moins l'esprit de cette résolution, ainsi que d'autres résolutions contraignantes. Une violation du droit international en alimente ainsi une autre. Les infractions aux sanctions envers la RPDC soutiennent l'agression militaire de la Russie contre l'Ukraine. La Suisse regrette vivement que la prolongation du mandat du groupe d'experts sur la RPDC ait échoué à cause d'un veto russe, alors que ce groupe menait des enquêtes sur les allégations des transferts illégaux d'armes entre la RPDC et la Russie. Deuxièmement, la Suisse condamne l'agression militaire de la Russie contre l'Ukraine. Il est consternant que, malgré les appels clairs et répétés de l'Assemblée générale et de la Cour internationale de justice, la Russie continue son agression militaire. L'envoi des forces armées des pays tiers pour la soutenir irait à l'encontre non seulement de ces appels, mais aussi de l'esprit de la Charte des Nations Unies elle-même. Nous appelons la RPDC et toute tierce partie à s'abstenir de toute action susceptible d'alimenter l'agression militaire russe. Et nous appelons une nouvelle fois la Russie à cesser immédiatement les hostilités et à retirer ses troupes de l'ensemble du territoire ukrainien. Finalement, en ce qui concerne l'architecture de non-prolifération soigneusement construite au fil des 5 dernières décennies, nous appelons la RPDC à prendre des mesures concrètes en vue d'abandonner ces programmes d'armes nucléaires, de missiles balistiques et d'autres programmes connexes de manière complète, vérifiable et irréversible, et à respecter le moratoire sur les essais nucléaires qu'elle s'est imposé. La Suisse appelle la RPDC à se soumettre à nouveau et le plus tôt possible au traité de non-prolifération et aux garanties de l'AIEA, ainsi qu'à signer et ratifier le traité d'interdiction complète des essais nucléaires. La Russie, comme État dépositaire du TNP, est appelée à le renforcer, non à l'affaiblir. Madame la Présidente, ce Conseil a la responsabilité et le devoir de répondre au double défi que représente l'agression militaire contre l'Ukraine et de dénucléarisation de la péninsule coréenne. En ce qui concerne l'Ukraine, la Suisse continue de soutenir la recherche d'une solution pacifique et reste prête à contribuer à tous les efforts visant à promouvoir la paix conformément à la Charte de l'ONU, en particulier les principes d'intégrité territoriale et d'indépendance. Rien ne peut justifier les conséquences humanitaires, sociales, psychologiques et économiques désastreuses de cette agression militaire. Elle nuit à tout le monde et ne profite à personne. Nous continuerons également notre engagement pour une péninsule coréenne dénucléarisée et en paix, et encourageons également le recours aux bons offices du secrétaire général pour un retour au dialogue, à la désescalade et dans la recherche de solutions diplomatiques. Nous encourageons la RPDC à engager un dialogue constructif avec le Conseil et le système onusien. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Switzerland for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Madam President, Mozambique wishes to commend the United States Presidency for convening this briefing section. We thank Mrs. Rosa Di Carlo, Under Secretary General for Political and Peace-Building Affairs, and Mr. Jong, Executive Director at the Conflict Armament Research, for their briefing and update on the subject under consideration. We acknowledge the presence of the representatives of Democratic and People's Republic of Korea in this meeting. We also acknowledge the participation of representatives of Ukraine and the representatives of delegations of the European Union. Madam President, we have several times expressed in this chamber our deep concern about the persistence of weaponization of the world, which undermines the global nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. The situation on the Korean Peninsula is sensitive for its potential for further escalating of tensions over the region. The risks associated with this situation are particularly related to the proliferations of weapons that can fall into terrorist groups or unauthorized institutions or entities, endangering the international peace and security. It is in this context that we continue advocating for exercise of moderation, restraint, and avoiding unilateral actions or inflammatory languages. The international community has a crucial role to play in promoting dialogue conducive to lasting peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. Our collective responsibility is utmost important since it may contribute to prevent and eradicate the threat posed by nuclear weapons. We call upon all importing and producing states to comply with their international obligations through effective dialogue and cooperation to ensure sustainable peace and stability in the region and in the world at large. Madam President, peace and security anywhere will only be possible through enforcement of international measures and instruments. The Outer Spaces Treaty, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and other relevant UN resolutions play a critical role in this regard. This is the best time for all of us to converge around the Secretary General's appeal and the agenda for disarmament. To conclude, Madam President, a world with less nuclear proliferation will always be a world with more peace and security. Otherwise, as long as the current trend of the competition and the denuclearize prevails, world peace and stability will be under permanent threat. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Mozambique for their statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as representative of the United States. Thank you, Undersecretary General DiCarlo and Mr. Leff, for your briefings. In vetoing the mandate renewal of the 1718 Committee panel of experts, Russia sought to prevent crucial objective investigations into DPRK's violation of Security Council resolutions. To shield the world from the truth about the DPRK's dangerous actions and Russia's complicity in them. The loss of this committee makes organizations like conflict armament research all the more critical, and the United States is grateful that its independent, well-regarded experts continue to provide clear and credible reporting on DPRK-related violations. These reports show why Russia was so desperate to overturn the mandate's renewal. Russia and the DPRK are engaging in unlawful arms transfers and training in brazen violation of numerous Council resolutions. Colleagues, Resolutions 1718, 1874, and 2270 collectively prohibit UN member states from receiving any arms, related material, arms training, or assistance from the DPRK or providing them to the DPRK. These resolutions were adopted in response to North Korea's nuclear tests. They are evidence of our sacred obligations to uphold international peace and security. Russia knows this. Russia voted for each and every one of these resolutions, and yet Russia has violated them in both directions. We assess North Korea has now sent Russia more than 20 1,000 shipping containers of munitions to date, containing at least 6 million heavy artillery rounds, along with well over 100 ballistic missiles. The Center for Armament Research's independent findings corroborate what we have seen in press reporting and other open source analysis. These missiles have subsequently been launched into Ukraine, impacting near civilian infrastructure and populated areas such as Kyiv and Zaporizhia. And the DPRK continued preparations to transfer more missiles to Russia in late 2024. We also have information that a large number of DPRK origin 170 millimeter long-range self-propelled artillery pieces and 240 millimeter long-range multiple rocket launchers are being introduced into the conflict. And now Russia turns to the DPRK for manpower as well as munitions in order to carry out its war of aggression against Ukraine, welcoming more than 11,000 DPRK troops onto its soil. And this is not from the press, this is from the DPRK. And not just any soldiers. North Koreans sent elite special forces units to Russia. This marks the first time North Korean troops have participated in large-scale ground combat operations in more than 70 years, and the first time they've done so outside the Korean Peninsula. And Russia is likely to use the deployment as a basis for future combined training exercises with the Korean People's Army. This is not a one-way street. The more Russia relies on the DPRK's support, the more the DPRK extracts it in return, exacerbating threats to peace and security, not only in Europe, but across the globe. In recent months, Russia has provided training to DPRK troops in artillery, UAV, and basic infantry operations, including trench clearing, an indication DPRK soldiers are participating in frontline operations and directly engaging in hostilities against Ukraine. We also have information that Russia has transferred air defense systems to the DPRK. The Kremlin continues to provide free and subsidized refined petroleum to the Kim regime above the UN-mandated 500,000 barrel cap, as well as sell dual-use technology and equipment. What's more, we are particularly concerned about Moscow's intent to share satellite and space technologies with Pyongyang, which the war in Ukraine has plainly demonstrated is crucial to an army's communications and intelligence gathering capability on the modern battlefield. And it continues to shield the DPRK from joint actions in this council, obstructing DPRK sanctions implementations while attempting to escape reproach for its violations. Alarmingly, we assess that Russia may be close to accepting North Korea's nuclear weapons program, reversing Moscow's decade-long commitment to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. We believe that Moscow will become more reluctant not only to criticize Pyongyang's development of nuclear weapons, but also further obstruct passage of sanctions or resolutions condemning North Korea's destabilizing behavior, as we've already seen. Colleagues, every single one of us must call out this recklessness, every single one of us. For far too long, China has provided political cover for Russia's violation, emboldening the DPRK to continue its ballistic missiles launches, among other dangerous, provocative behavior. This is not the behavior of any responsible member state, let alone two permanent members of the Council. Responsible Council members take seriously their duty to counter threats to international peace and security. Responsible Council members uphold resolutions that curb proliferation and remand recourse for human rights abuses. Responsible Council members have no reason to fear independent, objective experts, and responsible Council members do not enable tyrants for their own political gain. Colleagues, just 2 years ago, I visited Ukraine. I saw up close the devastation and despair, the mother in Kyiv who had to hold her daughter's lifeless hand after a Russian attack on her apartment building, the child who desperately wanted to return to school, the humanitarian aid worker who was detained and tortured by Russian forces, so traumatized she could barely speak. I will never forget the horrors unleashed by Putin, but I will also never forget the resilience of the Ukrainian people. For years, they have defended their land, their freedom, their identity, and they have defended one another too, taking in neighbors who lost their homes, risking their lives to feed those in need, nursing orphans back to health, showing the world that community is a form of resistance. Today, they face new threats, dangerous threats. No veto can deny that harsh reality. I know that the people of Ukraine will continue to stand up to oppression, to imperialism, to reckless proliferation, but all of us must stand up with them. And so once again, the United States calls on Russia to cease military cooperation with the DPRK, to end the senseless war of aggression against Ukraine and immediately withdraw its forces from Ukrainian territory within its internationally recognized borders. I also want to respond to China about engaging in dialogue with the DPRK. We have said repeatedly we're open to unconditional dialogue with the DPRK. Each time we've reached out, it has responded with a clenched fist, and we would welcome further dialogue with the DPRK as I speak here today. So, finally, we have to continue to work to meet our responsibilities as members of this council to uphold the charter we have all sworn to protect. The people of Ukraine demand this of us. They deserve it from us. They deserve a just and lasting peace. So let us all do our part to help them realize that. Thank you very much. I resume my function as president of the council. The representative of China has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give them the floor.
主席，我本来不想发言的，但是你刚才以美国代表身份发言的时候，一再点到中国的名字，所以我想我有必要做一个简短的回应。你刚才发言中对中国在半岛问题上的政策和立场进行歪曲和抹黑，这完全不可接受。中国作为负责任的大国和安理会的常任理事国，一贯主张根据宪章的宗旨和原则，和平解决争端。我们一直努力推动有关地区冲突和紧张局势的政治解决。无论是乌克兰问题上，还是半岛问题上，中方都在为和平疾呼、为对话奔走、为维稳努力。我们会继续这么做。同时，我们也希望美方能够切实为推动这些问题的最终解决发挥积极的作用。谢谢。
I shall now make a further statement in my capacity as the representative of the United States. I'm not going to respond directly because the issues that are on the floor now at hand is whether China has been giving support to Russia's efforts and protecting the ROK. Protecting the DPRK. And we have seen that over and over in this council. So I leave where I started in my statement. I think that statement stands for what I said. So I thank you very much. And unless there is another response, I will now give the floor to the representative of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
President, 2024 draws a close with its record as the most complicated and tragic year in the modern history. However, even today, we still witness the repetition of the abnormal practice at the UN Security Council, where discussion of the practical matter directly related to the international peace and security are put aside, while some individual member states are unreasonably taking issue with independent sovereign states for the sake of their narrow geopolitical interest. This meeting is yet another example showing that the UN Security Council is neglecting its important duty assigned by international community and abuse as an instrument of the United States for political pressure and platform of propaganda for spreading sinister public opinion. I strongly denounce the United States and its following forces for convening this unlawful meeting that turns black into white in pursuit of their selfish geopolitical interests without any regard for UN Charter and recognized international law. United States, its allies are none other than the main culprits who have incited confrontation and discord among nations and fomented ceaseless massacre of the civilian with irresponsible and illegal military intervention all the year around across the planet. Since outbreak of the Ukrainian crisis, U.S. military aid to the Zelensky clique has far exceeded $60 billion. This fact alone is enough to know how much it has contributed to destruction of the peace and stability in the region and beyond. In particular, outgoing U.S. administration allowed Ukraine to strike Russia's interior with U.S.-supplied long-range weapons, and some other Western countries followed suit, thus driving Ukrainian crisis to the more dangerous phase, giving rise to concern for outbreak of the new World War. It is also the United States and its allies who have caused the present total chaos and disorder and the worst ever humanitarian disaster since World War II in the Middle East. The reckless military act of the United States that seriously undermine international peace and security are already overstepping and the limit on Korean Peninsula as well. The United States has deployed tens of thousands of troops and all kinds of high-tech military hardware on permanent standby for several decades on Korean Peninsula and staged aggressive, frantic war exercise annually, mobilizing its strategic nuclear assets. It has recently elevated its alliance with ROK to the nuke-based military bloc. Thus, outbreak of the nuclear war in Northeast Asia is no longer a possibility, but a matter of time. While indulging its self-military intervention and the war threatened against sovereign states around the world, the United States has called for this meeting of the UN Security Council, talking about someone's alleged military engagement. And this is truly an example of the manifestation of the guilty party feeling shoot first. Whatever pro-US countries do, it is all legal and contribute to peace and security. But when anti-US sovereign states exercise legitimate rights, it is all illegal and threaten peace and security. Such brigandage argument is totally unacceptable in any case, as a typical example of a double standard. When it comes to normal development of the cooperative relation between sovereign states that fully conform with the UN Charter and international law, it's not a kind of the matter that anyone can interfere in. The Korea-Russia relationship is based on the Treaty on Comprehensive Strategic Partnership between the DPRK and the Russian Federation, that comes into effect in recent weeks. It promotes the welfare of the people of both countries and served as the security mechanism for easing tension in the region and guaranteeing a strategic stability of the world. It becomes a positive contribution to international peace and security and can by no means be subject of the criticism. DPRK will never tolerate the arbitrary and high-handed practice of the United States and its following forces in their attempt to impose hegemonic unipolar system of domination. It will fulfill its responsibility to defend a genuine international justice and to safeguard global peace and security. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Democratic Republic of Korea for their statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Stavros Lambrinidis, head of the delegation of the European Union to the United Nations.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states, the candidate countries North Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the EFTA country Iceland, member of the European Economic Area, as well as San Marino, align themselves with this statement. I would like to thank USG Rosemary DiCarlo and Mr. Jonah Leff for their briefings. President, I will focus my intervention around two main themes that are linked in an ever more dangerous way today. First, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea's continued violation of its non-proliferation obligations. And second, the increasing military cooperation between the DPRK and Russia, which constitutes a dangerous escalation and expansion of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, with serious and direct security implications not just for Europe, but globally. On non-proliferation, the nuclear and missile programs of the DPRK pose an immediate security threat to all countries and to the international disarmament and non-proliferation architecture as a whole. The DPRK must comply immediately with its obligations under UNSC resolutions by abandoning all its nuclear weapons, other weapons of mass destruction, ballistic missile programs, and existing nuclear programs in a complete, verifiable, and irreversible manner, and cease all related activities. Virtually everyone in this room has said this today. Virtually everyone. All UN member states, especially members of the UN Security Council, must ensure the full implementation of UN sanctions. We stress that those sanctions remain fully in place despite the Russian veto that derailed the 1718 Committee's panel of experts from continuing its work. We also reiterate a call for the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and urge the DPRK to take concrete steps towards this goal and to return to diplomacy. The DPRK will never be accepted as a nuclear weapon state. The DPRK must return to compliance with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and furthermore, we urge the DPRK to sign and ratify the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty without any preconditions or further delay. Madam President, turning to the issue of the expansion of military cooperation between DPRK and Russia, including direct engagement in combat against Ukrainian armed forces, let me stress again the EU's unequivocal and strong condemnation of such a significant escalation in Russia's illegal war of aggression against Ukraine. The presence of thousands of DPRK troops cooperating with the Russian military constitutes a serious breach of international law, including the most fundamental principles of the UN Charter, and a flagrant violation of multiple Security Council resolutions. This is a hostile act by the DPRK, which carries serious consequences for regional and global peace and security. Russia is knowingly spreading instability and escalation, not just in Europe anymore, but also on the Korean Peninsula and in the wider Indo-Pacific region. But the DPRK and Russia have been deepening their military cooperation in other areas as well. There is clear evidence that the DPRK has been providing arms to Russia including artillery shells and ballistic missiles, which Russia has used against Ukraine. Any arms exports or imports involving the DPRK are in violation of multiple Security Council resolutions. Russia itself, a permanent member of this Council, is directly accountable for these violations. We urge third countries to cease all assistance to Russia's war of aggression. This includes not only direct military support, but also the provision of dual-use goods and sensitive items that sustain Russia's military-industrial base. President, the interlinked character of these developments is increasingly evident and alarming. The European Union is particularly concerned about the potential for any transfer of advanced military capabilities or technologies by Russia to the DPRK, including nuclear or ballistic missile-related technology, in violation of relevant Security Council resolutions. In light of this, Russia's apparent shift of position on the denuclearization of the DPRK is highly suspect, dangerous, and unacceptable. Russia abandons key obligations from the Non-Proliferation Treaty, including to prevent nuclear proliferation, and violates multiple Security Council resolutions adopted by Russia's support, lest we forget. What is at stake is potentially monumental in terms of its proportions and its consequences for global, international peace and security. This Council needs to intervene before it is too late. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Lambrinides, for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Ukraine.
Well, thank you, Madam President. I thank Under-Secretary General Rosemary DiCarlo and Director Lav for their briefings. The direct involvement of DPRK troops in Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine is now a matter of fact. Starting at least from December 14th, numerous evidence, including video footage captured by Ukrainian drones, confirm the participation of North Korean soldiers in assaults on Ukrainian positions. The Russian forces have integrated these DPRK units into joint formations, employing them in operations against Ukrainian forces in the Kursk region. As seen in the video footage, North Korean troops utilize specific tactics. They primarily advance in large numbers on foot across open terrain and in extended chains. This approach bears a striking resemblance of infantry tactics employed during World War II, but is highly unusual for the Russian-Ukrainian war. Another notable feature is their lack of awareness regarding such modern weaponry as UAVs. Available video evidence reveals that North Korean soldiers seem unprepared to react to enemy drones and lack even the basic understanding of measures to counter drone-related threats. They have already suffered noticeable losses. As of 14th of December, the estimated losses of units composed of Russian and North Korean personnel amount to about 200 servicemen. Against this backdrop, the DPRK continues to supply weapons and ammunition to Russia. In particular, since December 2023, the DPRK has transferred over 20,000 containers of munitions and military equipment, as well as over 100 ballistic missiles to Russia, used by Moscow against Ukraine. The most recent case was registered last Friday when Russia used a DPRK missile in its massive strike against Ukraine's critical energy infrastructure.